Hi, welcome to Fiberchats. My name is Irina. I'm the host here. My guest today is a UK designer, Georgia Farrell. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I was watching one of your interviews and you mentioned that you were walking with your mom and she looked at some building and she was immediately telling you something about did you notice these lines of your building?
Yeah.
Oh my God, I corrupted her for life. So I had very similar experience last night. I was watching The 100, it's this futuristic kind of action series.
Yeah.
And there's people being killed and what have you. And then my husband goes, "Do you see the lace this girl is wearing?" And I was I corrupted you for life.
He's noticing the knits. And that's amazing. Yeah, you've corrupted him.
Well, tell me how you discovered knitting first. When did that happen? Tell me about your family story.
Sure. So I learned to knit as a child. I was taught by my nan or my grandmother. She was a wonderful lady. I'll try not to get emotional because we lost her last year, but she taught me to knit as a child, and she was the part of that generation that grew up during the Blitz, during World War II in London. So knitting was always a very practical thing for her. It's not like how I feel about knitting now, or how a lot of people maybe feel about knitting now, that it's a hobby, it's a fun thing to do, it's luxury fibers, etc. It was very much a practical thing. She knitted because she had to. And so when she taught me, I remember her telling me that I was going to knit a dishcloth because it had to still be practical. No matter how badly knitted it would still do the job. It could be holey, there could be ladders, there could be drop stitches, everything didn't matter because it would still serve its purpose. So and it was badly knitted. When I think back, and also because it was dishcloth cotton. That's not the easiest thing to knit with for your first try.
For sure,
yeah. So amazing memories of her teaching me to knit as a child. And
do you remember what she was knitting?
Well, she would knit for me. She would knit for her grandkids, me and my brother. I don't remember. She did knit for herself a bit. Yeah, I think she did, but mostly she'd like to knit for other people. And I've got a bunch of her old knitting patterns, that I can look through, and her old knitting bag, and some of the things she's pulled out of a magazine or whatever. Wanted to knit a lot of baby stuff. It was. And I didn't pick up the knitting again until, I must have been at college, I think, studying for it's kind of a 1 year you do between school and university here if you are interested in the arts or design or a career that way, but you're not really sure exactly what you'd like to study. And it was a really invaluable time for me to figure out what I wanted to do. If I'd gone straight from school to university, I probably would have picked art because I didn't know any better.
Right.
But this year I got to try out graphic design, photography, textiles, architecture, and that's when I figured out that I had a bit of a love or an affinity for textiles, and that's when I discovered knitting again. And so I was about 18, I think it was about 18, and I started making myself a snood, or picking up a few little projects for myself to knit, as well as what I was doing at college. So that's kind of how I got back into knitting, really.
When I listened to your interviews on YouTube, and I just told you before we started that I watch every interview out there, every interview starts with, "This is Georgia Farrell, promising young designer." I'm sitting there and thinking, this lady here has 169 designs on Ravelry alone. She's been doing it for close to a decade. At what point stop calling her promising? And
I question these things myself. Yeah. At what point am I no longer a young designer? Because I'm 32. I don't know what point you stop being called a young designer or new. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? The language.
Does that ever irritate you? Do you look at it and thinking okay, what else do I have to do to prove myself to you people?
Sometimes feel that way a little bit, but I like when people say new, because in my mind that just means fresh. It feels new and fresh and interesting, and I think that's a really positive thing. I'd always want to have my work to feel that way. and obviously myself a little bit as well. So yeah, but I know what you mean. Sometimes you can think to yourself, gosh, yeah, when do you lose that? When do you become like an established designer? Or when do what level do you have to, I don't know, how many designs do you have to have? How many years do you have to be doing it? Yeah, it's interesting. And I guess doing a lot of work as I do with Rowan yarns, I guess I'm working with designers who've been part of Rowan for, I don't know, 30 years, something like that. So I guess in that sense, I am still the newbie a little bit.
I mean, in my view, you are very established. So I don't know how much that means, but to me,
I'll take it. Thank you very much.
Let's talk a little bit about how Rowan happened, because your career skyrocketed super fast. And tell me about it. How did they discover you?
Yeah, so, well, it's a bit of a story. So after I finished university, so I studied, I've got a degree in textile design. I specialised in knitting. I left and I was like a bit lost. I was freelancing in fashion and doing a bit of making, making for other designers and that kind of thing. And then I needed some money, like most students. So I saw an advert, Rowan were advertising. They needed staff to work in Liberty of London, the department store, selling their yarn, helping with pattern queries. And my hand knitting at this point was by no means amazing, I might add. I had this degree in textile design. I specialised in knit, but 90% of what I did was on a machine. It's not the same. I did, however, do some hand knitting included in my collection. So I took that along to my interview, along with things that I'd been knitting for myself kind of after I graduated and during and whatever. And to my amazement, I got the job. So I started working 3 days a week so that I could still try and have this dream of freelancing in fashion and, knitwear design and whatever. And it wasn't, I was only there maybe like 6 months when I maybe it was even less than that, when I kind of was like, well, I know how to design knitwear. That's what I'm trained in. And now my knitting skills have come on phenomenally because I'm knitting a lot more. I'm surrounded by people that knit. My colleagues were really generous with their time. I worked with an amazing group of women who'd been knitting for, between them, many decades, and they were so generous with how they taught me, and I was constantly having to help people with the patterns, and so it was really my skill level just managed to catch up with my kind of like ideas, and I decided I wanted to knit my own things. I mean, I loved looking through the Rowan magazines and they were inspirational and amazing, but I had so many ideas myself that I wanted to knit. So I started, making up some of my own patterns, a bit more. And I had my work on show. I entered a competition, like a graduate competition, and my work was on display at the Knitting and Stitching Show at Alexandra Palace in London, which is a really big consumer show that's not just knitting, it's fabric and sewing and all sorts of things. And I had my work on display there, sort of like my graduate collection and a few other bits that I'd kind of added that were hand knitted completely as well. And I think from memory, it was Sarah Hatton, who used to work for design for Rowan. She picked up my card and gave it to someone at Rowan. And it eventually ended up with Kate Buller, who was then in charge of Rowan. And they kind of got in touch with me. And I was like, well, you might not believe this, but I actually work for you. In that short amount of time that I'd been working for them, they're in the head office up in Yorkshire in the north of England. I was in the shop in London, and I knew people at Rowan, but I didn't know the people in charge. I knew the people who were my managers and etc. And she was like, well, you'll have to submit for the magazine then. And I'm thinking, yes, please. I'm thinking, I don't really know what I'm getting myself in for, but I want to do this. And I was wearing like a cowl, a snood, and Kate was like, that can be your first pattern. And it was my first design published with Rowan. And that was like an independent pattern, and then I started submitting for the magazines from then. So I was still working in the shop for quite a few years when I was part-time, and I also started submitting for like the the kind of like the British knitting magazines like Knit Now, Knitting Magazine, all of those kind of things. And I was slowly building like a freelance kind of, my freelance work moved over to hand knitting and designing and patterns and eventually until I kind of took the plunge, gosh, I don't know how many years ago now, to go full time to give it a shot. And then it was after that, a little while after that, that I started working more closely with Rowan and doing my books with them. And, I had an idea and we talked about it and we developed My London, which was my first book with them. And it's kind of just, it's just gone from strength to strength from there working with Rowan. And it's so nice because, these are people who've known me since I was, 22, just out of university, so it feels, a lot of people at Rowan, feel like family. We've known each other for a long time. They've given me chances. And you read stories about people saying, start working for, someone, a big company on the ground level, and you'll eventually manage to get up. And people think, that never happens. But, sometimes it does. I had the most basic level job for Rowan, working in the shop. But, I met people there. And it mattered. And actually, like a lot of the things I learned at that time, I think have really helped me be a better designer.
You mentioned briefly that like when you started designing, right, you find like your skill level finally caught up with like your imagination, basically, right?
Yeah.
Have it been ever difficult for you, like to come up with the idea, it's one thing, but to know how to implement it, it's like completely different animal. Has it ever been difficult for you when you had an idea of what you want to design, but you didn't know how to make it into the reality?
Totally. Even though I'm trained in textile design is so for me, it's fabric design. I like designing fabrics. That's where I'm in my comfort zone. I could knit swatches all day long, all week, for weeks and weeks on end. And whether they went anywhere or not really wouldn't bother me. I like designing fabrics. But that's not the real world, is it? No one wants just a swatch design, do they? We want to knit things, we want to knit garments, we want to knit accessories, things that have a purpose. And so actually, like, it took me quite a long time to learn how to construct garments from my fabrics, or what fabrics would be suitable for what end purpose and that kind of thing. For sure, it even to this day, sometimes I've designed something and thought, now how am I gonna make that? But you, like most things, you do your research and you kind of just, you learn by trial and error a lot of the time. So I'll do a lot of the calculations and the working out and seeing if this is going to work and swatching different elements of it to make sure that it works. And you just work through the process. But it's definitely something that I've had to learn kind of like as I went along a lot. And I guess that time when I was working in the store, I was helping people with their pattern problems. So I was getting to see like where people get stuck on things, right. What things don't really make sense, or I was having to very quickly dive into a pattern 3/4 of the way through to figure out what someone was doing without having not knitted the first kind of like 3/4 of it. And I think all of that really helped me to learn about different kinds of garment constructions and stuff quite quickly.
I mean, it's probably an invaluable experience because you have to swim through unknown, basically, and figure.
Yeah, basically, you never knew what was going to walk through the door and what you were going to have to try and tackle and help someone with. And sometimes it would be things that I did. I remember one time it was a crochet problem, and my crochet's not as good as my knitting. I can crochet, and I remember thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to fix this? And this poor person, they've traipsed all the way over here. They would need my help. And I said, if you want to go and get a coffee, I'm just going to, I might need a bit of time to figure this one out. And I remember just having to do it by trial and error. And I did it myself and it came out okay. And I was like, okay, I don't know what you were doing, but I've done this and it was right. So come sit with me and we're going to do it together. And eventually you kind of, you learn by doing, don't you, a lot of the time.
Well, I mean, back to you being young and upcoming designer.
Yeah.
You feel like like, is it hard to say that, like, I'm an expert, I'm a designer, like I'm standing by my design, like I know it works? Do you get the imposter syndrome?
Yeah, it took me a lot of time to be able to actually stop saying, oh, it's just something I've made up, and to be able to say, no, this is something I designed, this is something I created. And yeah, it did take a long time for that to happen. And I think something that really helped me was that I took on a studio space to work out of here. So I stopped working from my bedroom in my parents' house to then my own living room. And I started working from a space that I shared with other creatives. And, you know, I met some wonderful people in that place and my first studio who really helped build my confidence. You know, we all had the same problems. You know, we could blow each other's trumpets, if you see what I mean, rather than we could big each other up a bit, give each other some confidence, because, you know, we were all making amazing things in our own disciplines. But it's really hard to have that confidence. And I tell you, it didn't come naturally to me, and it still doesn't really. But I've kind of had to work at that and find ways of talking about my work that I feel really comfortable in. You know, one of the things is, like, I really love talking about the inspiration behind my designs and the architecture. You know, so I've built a kind of like comfort zone of what I feel confident in of my designs and what I like to talk about. But yeah, there is that imposter syndrome, definitely. And to call yourself a designer feels like such a big, like a big title, doesn't it? And, you know, that's kind of like a badge you really want, but it's hard to put on yourself.
You mentioned that, like, in numerous places, that your first inspiration and most common inspiration comes from architecture, from the architectural lines. You know, there is this old TV series called Seinfeld, and then there is this character, Kramer. And you sort of like get to know and love him as Kramer, and you can't imagine him as anything else.
Yeah.
You ever nervous that people gonna like treat you as that, like architectural geek, and like you cannot break out of that box ever?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, people say that to me. Can you have one kind of like inspiration forever? Do you ever think you'll do something else? Like, yeah, I mean, maybe. I just, you know, at the moment, I feel like I can't help what inspires me, you know, and so I'm just drawn to what I'm drawn to, and that's my kind of jam, and I just am rolling with it for now. We'll see, you know, if things ever change. But I do feel like I have purposely wanted to build a kind of aesthetic where you can look at my designs and know that they're mine. I think that's been a goal for me, not being able to put a badge on myself or to be able to say that I do this or that or the other. But I would love for people to be able to look at my designs and know that they're mine without me saying it or without anyone telling them. And so I've wanted to build this kind of, this aesthetic around what I do. And I guess, you know, to my core, I am I like geometric things. I don't like organic things, you know, so that is kind of just, I guess, who I am as a designer, and what as a creative, what I'm drawn to.
When I look at your designs, what I like about them is that, like, when I hear that architecture inspires me, I'm thinking lines. But
yeah,
your designs are so much more complex than that. There is like this play of shadows and lights. There is like depth perception of the textures. So like, I like that it's not like the typical architecture of what people think in terms of architecture, right? It's not just the horizontal lines and vertical lines and all that things.
Yeah.
It's actually a play.
That's really nice to hear. Yeah, because I think there's, you know, and another element to this kind of like aesthetic I wanted to build. I really love texture within it, and I love that because I think that's my background in textile design, in fabric design, that, you know, there's so many people that design beautiful, really simple garments with no kind of like texture and depth and that extra element of, you know, and they do it so well. I don't need to do that. I think what I do best is when I'm designing these kind of like bringing texture and color and pattern and lines and shapes and forms and bringing it all together and adding that kind of like, I love that idea of bringing light and shade and getting that from architecture and how you can use knits and pearls, like the basic building blocks of knitting, not even anything really complicated, but how you can use that to create really interesting fabrics. I think that's kind of where I'm happiest designing.
Do you feel like being part of Rowan, like as amazing as it is, right? Do you feel like it limits you sometimes as a designer because you have their audience to entertain, basically?
Not in that sense. No, I don't think so, because I have lots of people that, you know, follow me who don't typically knit Rowan, and they're just interested in me as a designer and my kind of point of view and what I create and put out there. I don't think it's necessarily limited to their audience, but there's also this thing that I've discovered recently where, you know, as a designer, you always kind of have in mind who you've designed whatever garment or accessory for, right? And a lot of the time it's kind of like me, you know. That's who I've designed it for. I generally maybe think that it's quite modern and fresh, and I think young people might like it, and it's always fascinates me because the amount of people that aren't that person who knit my stuff, and I love that. And actually, so, you know, we can have this idea of who our audience is or who we want them to be, and it is who it is basically anyway, and that's wonderful. I think it's really nice to be caught by surprise by things like that. And you know, I think the nice thing about Rowan is they always give their designers a platform to talk about their work, right? So many other brands don't have the name of the designers on their patterns, or then you've got of course you've got independent designers, but I'm talking about big companies, you know, like Rowan, they're contemporaries, but you know, a lot of them don't give their designers a face, a voice, or anything like that. Whereas what I love to do is talk about my work as well as actually make it. And I'm totally given that opportunity to communicate with people whoever they might be. Yeah, and that's really nice.
Do you remember your first like celebrity moment when somebody jumped you unexpectedly or like wore something you designed?
Gosh, that's a tricky one. Yeah, I mean, there's been a few moments like that, and I always think, oh, that's not going to happen. And people jokingly say things to me like, oh, you know, that's going to happen, and it never does. But I tell you what was funny was at Vogue Knitting Live in New York this January, someone jokingly said, oh, you know, you'll be walking around the hotel and people will spot you and they'll want to pitch whatever. And I literally was like, no, you're joking. Like, I'm in America, I'm a young British designer, no one's gonna know who I am. I got in the lift and then someone was like, Georgia Farrell, and then they hugged me out of nowhere, and I was just like, wow, that was surreal. Specifically because we just literally 5 minutes before discussed that could happen, and I'm going, nah, I didn't believe them that it was, and it's kind of like this whole thing because everyone's in this place at the same time. It's more than a show, right? Because people are staying in this hotel where the show is, and so it's kind of it's wonderful and amazing. But it always amazes me when people wear my garments, especially to come and show me. I think that's really, really nice. Are
you ever surprised by their color choices or like what they do with your designs?
Yeah, totally. And I think sometimes people go, oh, I've changed something, I hope you don't mind. I'm like, no. And that's kind of one of the greatest compliments, really, because you've had to put in the time and effort to make it exactly how you want it. And I'd rather you made it exactly how you want it. Isn't that the whole point of knitting? Our own, you know, making ourselves rather than buying. So yeah, colors always fascinate me, and sometimes people put colors together and I'm like, God, I love that so much, why didn't I think of that? I like that better than what I chose sometimes. And then other times I'm equally like amazed by colors that people put together that are just not in my color zone, if you see what I mean. Right. I'm really not into like reds, oranges, browns. That's really not my comfort zone. I mean, bright orange maybe, I quite like that, but kind of rusty, earthy tones are really not my thing. And then I see people do wonderful things with them, especially when it's my design, and I think, oh, that's amazing, that's really cool. I'd love to maybe, you know, if I ever got brave enough to try something like that. I think, you know, you never know. I'm really instinctual with color, so my kind of color palette, as it were, that I like to design with kind of changes and evolves a little bit as time goes on, because it's just, I don't know, things that seep in. Maybe it's slightly trend driven. I don't particularly go out to look for trends like that, but it kind of is subconscious, isn't it? It leaches into you, you know, certain colors that are everywhere, and then you suddenly start thinking about colors you'd never thought about before.
You're talking about like if you're brave enough to choose some colors that are like out of your comfort zone, but like I'm thinking to myself the entire time we're talking, is it really luck where you're like in the right place at the right time to have somebody spot your work and like invite you to Rowan, and you somehow like happen to have this brilliant career? Or is it your character, basically, that you don't say no to anything, that you jump into things without being an expert yet, that you like do first and think about it later?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm not that good at putting myself out there, self-confidence, but if someone offers you an opportunity, I never want to say no, because you know, I just think if something's come to me in life, like landed in your lap, I mean, you've got to take those, haven't you? You've got to be lucky. You feel fortunate enough that that's happened, and you want to, yeah, you always want to say yes. And sometimes it does mean you'll figure it out later. And sometimes, you know, and I'm getting a little bit better at being more like, no, this is what I want to do. And coming up, it's still, you know, I still find that pitching an idea thing can actually be quite intimidating and daunting, even to people that I've worked with for years. You know, because that's part of how I work with Rowan. It's kind of like half them giving me design briefs to design to, and then half me going, oh, well, I've got an idea. What about this? And yeah, and I really like that way of working, actually, because if it was all my own choice, I don't think I'd ever do anything out of my comfort zone. You know, if I chose everything, then I'd probably just make the same stuff all the time. You need to be pushed sometimes. You know, I had a thing recently where I got a design brief and I was like, oh no, I don't know why they've given that to me. I don't think I'd be the best person for it, blah, blah, blah. I didn't really want to do it, tried to get out of it. And they really wanted me to do it. And then I did it, and I designed some things that in the end, I was like, I'm really proud of what I've made, and I really love the designs that I've come up with. But I never would have done them on my own, because I would have gone, no, I don't like that brief. That's not my thing. I just would have let that pass me by if I wasn't kind of like, yeah, drawn into something. And I think that can only be good for you, to be pushed outside of your comfort zone a little bit every now and again.
You mentioned somewhere that it takes like a year to 18 months for any given design to be published in the magazine. Do you ever feel like by the time it's being published, you're like so over it and you're like, oh, why did I even design it?
Yes, absolutely. Sometimes I can't even remember what I've done. They'll go, oh, let me show you the new season, and they've got the whole lineup, and I was like, was that one mine, or was that one mine? Oh, now I remember doing that. Yeah. You know, yeah, sometimes it can be such a long time, and that's a shame in a way, because you lose the momentum, and you really have to be quite like forceful with yourself, even with things like, okay, at some point I'm going to need to share this on social media, but I'm working on it like a year before, so I have to make sure that I'm taking the videos and taking the pictures and of me if it in process, because I won't be able to share them for ages. And then by the time it comes to when I need to share some stuff, I've got nothing left to share, because it was a year ago and I've kind of packed all of that away and I'm already working on something else. And you know, it can be challenging because it's such a long time frame. But I think that's where I like the fact that I am not just, so I the way I work with Rowan, I'm still a freelancer, even though I work really closely with them. So if I want to design my own pattern and put it out in 2 months' time, I can still do that, you know. So if I want like some immediate kind of fun, you know, I've come up with this idea and I just want to put something out there myself, because I feel like the tumbleweeds rolling in on my Instagram, because it feels like I've not done anything for ages or something, you know, I can do that myself. You know, and it's really nice. I can, yeah, because self-publishing is so accessible now, isn't it, which is really great. So I can have something up on Ravelry if I want to really quickly, and so that I can get the best of both worlds, you know, in that respect.
Does Instagram, is that like your place for rest, entertainment, or does it drive you nuts that you have to post something and you have to put the content?
Yeah, a bit of both. And I've been very bad lately. I'm on a bit of a hiatus on Instagram. I think we fall in and out of love with different social media things, and at the moment it's not really my jam. But yeah, I would go on Instagram for pleasure as well, but there is that nagging, oh, I should have done this and I should have done that. And, you know, I see other people posting like daily and I think, oh, you know, I should be doing what they're doing. And yeah, that kind of pressure to self-promote it when it doesn't come naturally as well can be, yeah, really challenging, and something that, you know, I go through phases with it. Sometimes I really love Instagram because you get really good connection with people. Other times you post and no one sees it, no one says anything. So yeah, it's a bit of a love-hate relationship.
Do you ever doubt yourself? Do you ever like wake up and think like, oh, I was just lucky, like I was just in the right time in the right place and anybody else can do same or better, and like why me, and where is it?
I think if I said I didn't, I'd be lying. I'm only human. I definitely feel that way sometimes. But that is, you know, I have to remind myself that I work hard and that I have something unique to offer. You know, my perspective, my creative kind of that's what I have that's unique to offer. And that, you know, I've had really meaningful, lovely connection with people that I've met through knitting, and that's so valuable to me. And I think that's a really great thing that not everyone has, you know. So yeah, I have to try and remind myself sometimes, but I absolutely doubt myself, and I often think to myself, I have been lucky and fortunate, but then I look over the times where I put myself out there and, you know, push myself into uncomfortable situations to kind of like grow my career. And you look over those things, don't you? And you tend to sometimes just remember the things that fell in your lap. But
well, recently you moved. Let's talk about your yarn stash in that regard. Because I've heard about you packing your yarn stash.
Gosh.
Do you own anything besides Rowan? Is there like anything else in your stash?
Yeah, I mean, so between working for Rowan in store and then working with Rowan more closely now designing, I actually worked in another yarn shop in London called Loop. You've probably heard of Loop. Amazing. So I have quite a lot of yarn from my time working there because you can't help yourself. And yeah, and I have yarn from way back before when I very first started knitting still. I clearly was in the stash building phase even back then. I have yarn that I've been given from so many various sources, like when I used to freelance with knitwear designers. I've got cones of yarn from that phase, really interesting kind of fibers and different textures. You know, I have a lot of friends that knit because I feel like I was a knitter first, you know, even though I was always kind of designing, because you know, so I've been given, which is such a nice thing. Like I've had friends gift me yarn from their stash, which is always such a meaningful and lovely thing. And, you know, I want to do something wonderful with it, but I'm not sure what's worthy of yarn that a friend has obviously spent a lot of money on and then decided they want to give to you. So yeah, I've got all sorts of things in my stash, but I have a massive stash of yarn for designing as well. So that's what's in my studio, what I kind of design with week in, week out. And then I've got kind of like personal stash, which is still mostly at my parents' house. Because when I moved into my flat, there wasn't a lot of room for it. So I've got stash everywhere. I've got some stash here. I've moved studio, and I've got piles and bags of yarn, and I've organized it all very well, which is very unlike me. I'm not that kind of person, but when you're trying to work, you know, you should be, you know, if I'm working, I should be organized. So I've, you know, got all of my yarns in bags, and it's all zipped up bags, and it's all labeled and lettered so that I know what's in each bag, so when I need something I can go straight to it. But yeah,
Well, when
I
you
think,
talk to designers, like I'm always curious if you
yeah.
ever have time to just like wake up, grab your needles, and knit whatever the heck you want from your stash. Like
No.
if you are a designer, you are on a job,
Yeah.
you have deadlines, you have ideas. Do you ever get chance to just like fool around and just knit for like no
No,
reason?
not really. You know, I think sometimes you feel the pressure to work on the work knitting a lot of the time, and I find that quite hard, and I can only knit so much. I mean, I knit a lot, but you know, I don't know about you, but I get pains, I get aches, you know, there's only so much I can knit, and if I'm knitting too much for fun, you know, yeah, it doesn't happen that often. I mean, I do like to knit things for myself, but I tend to think quite strategically about what I knit for myself. So I knit something that I can then post about on social media, or I knit my own sample of a garment I've designed for Rowan so that I can wear it to events. I think quite strategically about things like that. But at the moment, like I'm knitting a baby hat because my friend's having a baby. So I still do things like that, you know. I still find time for personal knitting, but just for fun, knitting is kind of, yeah, hard to find time for. But I think sometimes that's really important to find time for, because you might come up with something like new and interesting when the pressure's off.
So
So
how does design ideas come to you? Like when you walk on the streets, you see a new interesting to you building, or you see some play of shadows and lights. Do you take a picture? Do you sketch? Do you memorize it and then eventually do something with it?
bit of both. I take a lot of pictures. I think having a smartphone in your bag is just the best thing ever. So I take a lot of pictures, but often it'll be something, and I'll be thinking about an idea. And it could be that it's not necessarily something I've seen that I want to copy like for like, but it's an idea, and I'll go and draw maybe from that idea. You know, I've got a notebook with lots of ideas in them, and sometimes they go somewhere and sometimes they go nowhere. And I'll look back and I'll go, there was nothing wrong with that idea. It's a good idea. It just didn't fit into anywhere right now. You've got to bank these things, because at some point you will have like creative block, and you won't be able to think of anything. And that's when you will need to look back through the things that have caught my eye, that I've drawn, that I've taken pictures of. You know, you really need that to draw on at times where you've got no inspiration, but sometimes it just comes out of the blue and it's bizarre. You know, you just get I get a feeling about something, and I'll try something and I'll pull some colors together, and it kind of like starts from nowhere and is suddenly a thing. And they're often the best things that you make, I think. You know, they didn't need a lot of like planning or you know, it is like abstract. The collection I made with Rowan was one of those things that really kind of came out of nowhere for me. And it's like, so trying to explain it. So like with my London, it was this concept, oh, it's about architecture in London that inspires me. I live near London. I go to London a lot. This is a thing. I spent a day in London. I found all this inspiration, and this is what I've come up with. Whereas abstract, it was like trying to actually explain what I was doing to people. At the time when I was designing, it was really hard, because I was just like, I can't explain, but something is coming and I'm doing something and I think it's going to be really good. And yeah, so it can be really, yeah, it can be really obvious, or it can be from places that are totally obscure.
Well, when you go to like a concert and you listen to music, what you imagine about this music, like what it tells you, might be like completely opposite of what composer actually thought when he was writing it. Do you feel like it's your job as a designer to explain yourself, or do you think it's, you know, art's privilege not explaining anything and letting people decide for themselves?
That's a really interesting thought that I have never really thought about. I often feel like the story behind my work is as important as the work itself. And so I do feel like I need to tell that story. But I don't know whether that's because I want to impose it on people. I think it's a nice thought that they would have their own impression or interpretation of what I've made and where it's come from and what it means to them. And I think that's a really, really cool idea. I like that a lot. But I feel like that my need to tell the story is more from me within me, I guess, you know, like I find that just talking about a sweater isn't as interesting as talking about what inspired it and where it came from and my process. And I think I feel more comfortable and confident in talking about that than just being like, oh, it's a lovely sweater. I hope you like it. I don't know. So yeah, that's really interesting. I hope that people think that they can still make their own, you know, conclusions about where something's come from. And I have had people say to me before, well, like, I looked at that and saw this, whereas what I looked at it and saw was what I actually intended or where it actually came from. And I'm like, that's really cool. I like that you can see something different to me. I mean, isn't that just people, you know, we're all so different. We're all going to take different things from the same place.
I saw that you did like knit alongs on Rowan Connect. And how does it feel like when you actually hanging out with people who knitting your designs? Like,
it's really nice, actually. So I've done 2 knit alongs now. We did a Built Well knit along, which was a blanket inspired by different cities that I'd traveled to, like pre-pandemic. And that was a really fun knit along because we made it kind of like a surprise each week which city we were going to, and then I'd show them the building and ask if anyone recognized it, and then people would knit the square, and we had a Facebook group, and it was really, really fun and interactive. And then real recently I just did another one, which was a sweater, which was the first time that we've done something like that. I mean, me personally and Rowan, a sweater make along, and that was really fun too. Yeah, it's really nice getting that interaction with people, you know. Just going back to all my days working in the shop, you know, I spent 3 days a week talking to knitters all the time, and I felt really connected to the knitting community, and I loved the chit chat about yarn and the enthusiasm and like this shared like hobby or whatever passion that we have. And then you sit in your studio on your own working alone and it feels totally different. And social media it is great, but it's not the same. And yeah, I really enjoy that kind of aspect of it, that communal aspect. It was interesting this time because we ran it like a live knit along. So the first one I did, we pre-recorded the content, and then the interaction was more in the comments, in the questions, in the Facebook group. Whereas this time there was that element of it in the Facebook group and everything as well. But we did weekly live sessions where I would talk about what was in this week's release and what we'd be going through. We'd pre-recorded the tutorials just to make sure that the lighting and everything was all good for that. We showed these tutorials, and then we even had time where people could talk, you know, like you and me are talking on Zoom now. And that was kind of a bit daunting actually at times, because you just don't know what someone's going to say. And it's one thing if they, you know, say it to you in a message on Instagram, or they say it to you in real life in just a conversation that the two of you are having. But you know, there's like 50 people on this call, and you never know what question you're going to get asked, and you've got to be you've got to be ready for whatever's going to come out. So that was a bit daunting, but actually really, you know, people are nice and genuine questions. And what was really nice was, you know, seeing how people you know, had made changes, or they had ideas of something they wanted to add to the sweater, and then other people liked that element, and then they wanted to take that and they'd be asking my opinion, and I'm like, do it sounds wonderful, you know, make it your own. And then the things I've seen come out of it, just amazing. Yeah, I really loved the experience. So I'd definitely do that again.
Does it stress you to be considered a trendsetter? Because people look up to Rowan for trends, right? Like I see all the time store owners looking through the pages of magazine and going like, this is the trend for this season, and this is going to be the trend for next season. And you are sort of responsible for those decisions. Is that a lot of pressure?
Yeah, actually, that is something that crosses my mind you know, like when I'm designing something, you do, like, it's the same when you were saying, do you get that imposter syndrome? And I've seen these funny little Instagram meme sort of things, and it's like a wheel when you're designing. It's like, yeah, I love it, it looks amazing. Oh wait, does it look amazing? Oh, I'm not sure. Oh wait, it definitely looks amazing. And you go around in this circle sometimes. And I get that. I'm like, you know, store owners are going to buy my book, I guess, if they like it. They're gonna buy yarn to support it. They're going to be talking about it. They're going to be trying to sell it into their stores. And yeah, that's kind of like pressure, especially if you're doing something that's a bit different. I wonder if you've been doing it for years, whether you have a bit more confidence, as in, you know, what kind of sells, and you've got that backup. You know, this collection sold really well, for example, or was received really well. And it's similar to that. So I kind of know that this one will be good too. Whereas I'm not that far into it yet. You know, I've only done a handful of different collections like that. And, you know, I look at my own work, if I've done like a full collection, like abstract or something, and I have my favorites, or the ones I think that everyone are going to love. And then it's usually not those ones that everyone loves. And it's so funny, which that always makes me think, oh gosh, I haven't got a clue really, have I? But I obviously doing something right, you know, because the book was well received. People enjoyed it. I've seen things people have knitted from it, all of the good stuff that you want. So yeah, you do get that pressure sometimes, because especially like local yarn stores, local yarn shops, you know, they do such an amazing job, and it's hard. It can be a really hard thing to do, to run a store, and in this kind of climate especially. And I don't want to make their lives harder. I want to make their lives easier. I want it to be successful for them. So I do feel the pressure a bit. Yeah.
I don't know if it's gonna be easier, or if it's like with every passing book you're gonna be like, well, what if my last book was my highest achievement? Do you ever think that?
True. Yeah, true. You think, am I ever going to be able to do something as good as that I did like 2 years ago or something? Yeah, maybe.
Well,
I'll let you know.
I'm 100% sure that you haven't got to that point yet.
Oh, not peaked yet.
Nah.
I hope not.
I honestly, I don't even think that there is such a thing, because I feel like we all change as people, like as we get older.
Yeah.
And what was brilliant when we were 20s, it's different when we are 30s. And what we come up when we are 30s, it's as brilliant, or, you know, it's always, because it's always about you. You put yourself, you put your understanding of life, you put your skills into those designs, and people sense that. So I don't think there is like an age limit to creativity.
No, and I think your perspective will change. Your point of view will, like you say, will change as you age, and then that will inevitably bring something new to the table, so that it'll always hopefully feel fresh. I think that's something I fear, that my work will become like stale, and people will have seen it all before and not be interested, and that I won't be coming up with something new, that I'll just be trotting out the same. I don't know. I fear that I'm going to get to that point at some point in my career. And I don't feel like I'm there now or near there yet, you know, but I do think in the future, I really hope that never happens to me.
I don't think it's going to ever happen, because as your work changes, you are changing. So it's all like organically just changes and evolves. So I think you have a very bright future, regardless the fact that you're an established designer.
Thank you.
And I can't really wait to see like what your next collection will hold. I'm sure it's going to be brilliant and trend-setting.
Oh, well, I hope so. I hope that, I mean, I'm working on stuff right now for...
That is secret, because my audience is very good at keeping secrets.
Are they?
Like all 10,000 of them can keep a secret.
I'm working on next autumn, winter, and spring, something for spring, summer, sort of January, spring, summer after that, 2025. That's what I'm working on. So the end of 2024, autumn, winter. And I mean, there's one thing that I'm working, and I can't say, but I wish I could, but there's something that I'm working on that I'm obsessed with, and really feeling like I'm doing good work, you know. You finish a swatch and I steam it and I sew in all the ends and I put it down, and I'm like, yes, that came out how I wanted it to come out, and I'm really feeling like this is going to be something good. So yeah.
I want to
I'm
ask you about those swatches. So
yeah,
I was interviewing Cecilia Campachara, and she is like a queen of swatches. She's doing zillions of them, and she keeps them in the stacks of pizza boxes, which like on top of everything, like all her furniture covered with like stacks of pizza boxes, and she marks them, and like all her swatches are there. What happens to your swatches?
Well, I have different places for different swatches. So I have like a big box next to my desk that's got like a flappy lid that I can reach out, and that's for ones that I like, but I haven't done anything with. So I have a place for them. And then the ones that go on to be my actual collections, well, a lot of them, I keep them, and I've organized them and I file them, because often if I'm teaching classes, they'll be really valuable tools, or if I'm for my books, I like to photograph my swatches and share them on social media. So they're my precious ones, and I really look after them. Some of the ones, if I'm designing for Rowan and it's not like a book of mine, it's for the magazine or whatever, then Rowan keep them because they have them all on file. And then, shock horror, I have actually thrown some away. If I really didn't like them, then they sometimes do go in the bin for recycling. But yeah, I have swatches everywhere and anywhere. I'm nowhere near as organised as Cecilia is, clearly. I wish I had more of a system, because sometimes I find a swatch and I'm like, oh, now what was I doing there? And even if I can figure out what I knitted, the one thing that really bugs me, I'm like, what needle size did I use? Did I use the recommend? And I'm trying to think back, and I often have to then re-swatch. I really should label them and file them or something, but like I said before, I'm not actually that organized a person. So
okay, like last question. When it comes to swatches, like this is like love-hate relationship. Like there are knitters who would rather knit a sweater the size of Empire State Building than swatch. And then there are knitters who swatch everything, even scarves, that doesn't matter like how big it's gonna be, right?
Yeah.
What are you looking for in a swatch? What information do you get from a swatch?
Well, obviously there's the obvious one, the tension. We're checking for tension, but something that I think is really good about, well, I think is really useful about swatching, especially if you change yarn, if you're not using the recommended yarn, you need to get a feel for the fabric, right? And there's no way around that. If you've changed the yarn, especially, you don't know. You can feel a ball of yarn, but it doesn't feel like the fabric that you knit up. And I've done this many times. I've swatched something in a yarn and I think it's going to work, and there's nothing wrong with the design or the pattern, the texture, but it doesn't work in that yarn. Even if it's the same weight, and I change it for something the same weight, the fiber content reacts differently, the way the yarn is spun, the construction. There's so many varieties of how a yarn can be produced these days, the chainettes, the worsted spun versus the woolen spun, there's so many things. So you want to look and see that the fabric that it creates is going to work for whatever you want to make. So if you've used something that's really drapey and the original yarn wasn't really drapey, that's going to have a massive effect. And it doesn't mean that you can't do it. You just need to know before you start, right, most of the time. So I think swatching, and it's so important for tension, the amount of people that get really disappointed with the finished garment because the tension's wrong. I used to see it all the time, and people, they'd come out and they'd be like, it doesn't fit me, it doesn't even measure up right, blah, blah, blah. And you don't want to be that person that's like, did you swatch? But it is really important. But the way I swatch, I'm not knitting to a pattern. So it's different, because I knit swatches, I say swatches all day long. But I'm not like knitting to someone else's pattern. I'm not trying to get the tension. I am, that is the tension that I've made it. I'm designing this kind of fabric, and I guess it's different. I think if I was knitting as a knitter, I might feel the same way about swatching, who knows. But I do think it's it's a valuable part of the process that shouldn't be underestimated.
If you found yourself on an uninhabited island with only one kind of Rowan wool yarn, what would it be?
Oh, it's a tough one. I think I'd have to say I really like their alpaca soft DK, and because it's the kind of yarn that you could knit anything with and it will take it. You know, there's certain yarns that have got a lot of mohair in, they can only do certain things, whereas I feel like it's a really good workhorse yarn, and it's so soft, but it's, you know, it's not too soft, if you see what I mean. Like it's comparable to the lovely cashmere they have, but you know, in price terms it's a lot more affordable. But you can knit texture with it beautifully. It takes texture so well, and I think that's my favorite. You know, there's a lot of yarns that are popular at the moment that are very fluffy and fuzzy, and I guess, or they've got flex in them and all of these things, that they're beautiful and they're really great if you just want to knit something simple because they make it all look interesting. But you can't knit like textured patterns. It doesn't have the stitch definition. It doesn't show off the kind of things that I really love to design, whereas something like like the alpaca soft is a good solid yarn that you can cable with it beautifully. It takes the knit purl patterns really well. Equally, you could do color work with it, and it comes out really nicely. So I think that would have to be my pick, but that's a really hard question.
Well, I have another very hard question. When you're going to the festivals, so like trade shows,
yeah,
how difficult for you to pack your suitcase and decide what comes with you?
Oh, that's always hard. It's always hard. Like, how many garments do you take? And you know, you want to show off your nice garments, and also I need to take like lots of projects and work to show. Yeah, I mean, when I traveled to America at the start of the year for Vogue knitting and then to go on teaching, my hack was to take vacuum bags. I got this tiny little pump that sucks all the air out of everything, which meant that I could take so many samples. I turn up with like a suitcase at the yarn stores and then it would like explode full of samples when I actually let the air out of everything. And I was telling everyone about my hack because it's amazing. And you know, you can take extra yarn with you as well. I mean, I had so much yarn, so many samples to show people and to wear and everything. It was, yeah.
I'm actually using that for my Rhinebeck trips.
Right.
So thank you very much.
It's so good. It's just a tiny little electric pump that you charge up, and oh my gosh, amazing, life-changing for traveling.
Well, I hope I'm going to run into you at one of the festivals someday soon. That would be awesome.
Wouldn't it? I think that would be really lovely. I've really enjoyed chatting to you. It's been so nice.
Thank you for being my guest today. It was really awesome to have you on my channel.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's been great.